give her a round of applause. And get this started.
All right, I'm just going to put this out here. Learning programming is hard. There are innumerable reasons to feel overwhelmed. And this gets straight to the core of the problem, really, innumerable. There is just too much. There's too much to learn, too much to know. It's paralyzing. Strangers email me their cries for help. They ask if I'll be their mentor. The details vary, but the requests boil down to two things. They want a significant chunk of my time, often an hour or two a week, and there's no time limit. Kim also gets these emails. There's no time limit on their request. They basically want it forever. So they think they're asking me to be their mentor, but they're not. They're asking me to be their tutor, nanny, coach, therapist. I could be their tutor, nanny, coach, therapist, but not for free. No matter how well they state their case, the answer to an enormous, unbounded request to a stranger is going to be no. Now, some people might say yes. They seem to end up exhausted and sucked dry, and this is not something I aspire to. Now, there's an art to asking for help. You need to balance the size and scope of your request against the amount of trust that you've built up with the person that you're asking. Right? That doesn't give you a lot of leeway when you're asking for stuff from people you don't know. Right? You're sending an email to a stranger, you respect them, you admire them. You basically have two goals. You want a response, and you don't want to irritate them. Right? You need to catch their attention, explain why you're interesting or important, or explain why, if you're not currently interesting or important, why you're potentially interesting or important. And don't be arrogant, but also don't be self-effacing. There needs to be a reason why you're contacting them specifically. Show sincere admiration for their work. Don't make this about aspects of their identity that they have no control over. This is about their output. You can't fake sincere admiration. You can't hand wave it. It has to be genuine and it has to be specific. And then you have to let the person know what you want. A lot of people ask for personal resources. The problem with personal resources is that they get depleted. Someone spends that time. They spend that energy and they don't get it back. Be very, very careful about asking a stranger to deplete their time and energy on your behalf. Now, people also ask for social resources which don't get depleted, but they're tricky because it's about access to their network. Right? You generally don't have the social capital built up to ask a stranger to lend you their influence. And then you have informational resources, and these are things that can be written down. Once it's been shared, the transaction is over. This is the sweet spot for unsolicited requests. In his book, The First 20 Hours, Josh Kaufman writes about how he became captivated by the idea of learning windsurfing. Now, there's a small hitch. Kaufman lives in Denver. Denver's landlocked, there are no oceans, there are no local experts, there are no classes, no personal trainers, no clubs, no windsurfing equipment stores. He's basically on his own learning how to hydroplane on reservoirs. Right? One of Kaufman's obsessions is how to go from absolute zero in a new skill to getting past that first frustration barrier. It's about how to be just good enough so that you can enjoy yourself. When making his plan for learning windsurfing, he ran into a little bit of a snag. He had narrowed down his choice of surfboard to one of two boards. But then he was stuck, and so he emailed the author of a windsurfing blog, briefly laid out his problem, and the guy responded. Apparently, this was a no-brainer. One of the boards was exactly what he needed. The other one was only going to be useful if he was a very skilled practitioner. Kaufman had done his homework. Right? The fact that he's learning how to windsurf in Denver is kind of intriguing. He contacted this particular author because he had read every single post on his blog, and he had a very specific informational request directly related to this person's area of expertise. He didn't tell the guy his life story. You should be able to read your email out loud without rushing in 60 seconds or less. You should spend a whole lot more time than that writing it. You don't have to be formal, but don't be sloppy. Even if you do everything right, you might not get a response. And this doesn't mean that they hate you. Right? They might, but probably not. Right? People who get a lot of unsolicited email have often given up responding to everything. So getting better at this can get you help. It's probably not going to get you mentorship. Right? Mentorship is not something that happens between strangers. In the real world, mentorship typically happens by accident. In 2012, I submitted my first ever talk proposal to a conference. They had absolutely no good reason to accept me as a speaker. Right? Nobody involved in the conference knew who I was. I didn't blog. I didn't even really tweet. I had never spoken in public, not even at a meetup, not even at a wedding. Through some combination of luck and a blind CFP process, the talk got accepted. I started preparing it. Right around this time, I'd come across this programmer who had a project that I was interested in, and I gave them a bunch of feedback. And most of it was in writing, but at one point, we got in a video chat to talk about it. Anyway, they'd spoken at a bunch of conferences, and I told them about my talk getting accepted, and they were like, oh, cool. Show me what you got. So there are a few things I want you to notice here. First, I had an existing relationship with this person. Not a close relationship, but we had had several interactions. Second, this offer was small and finite. They were saying, I'm assuming you've done some work. Show me. I might have an opinion. They weren't committed to helping me become a great public speaker. They weren't committing to help me prepare a great talk. They were committing very casually to one interaction. Third, I was already moving under my own steam. Right? If I had been holding off on getting started, afraid of wasting my time doing all of the wrong things, I would have had nothing to show them. I started reading up the script I was writing, and they stopped me after a few seconds. They was like, I don't care about the details. So tell me what point you're trying to make. I had to think pretty hard about that. And I went off for a couple weeks, did a bunch of work. Next time we talked, I had my main points. I had some sort of outline, kind of. Had my arguments. I had 7 code examples. I showed them the first code example. It consisted of 2 slides, before refactoring and after refactoring. I talked about what changed between the two. They stopped me and said, now you look smart and I feel dumb. That was not what I was going for. I went off again and did a bunch of work to break the refactoring down into individual steps, and I showed it to them, and they were like, great, but this is all facts. This is all details. You need to give me a reason to care. Well, I went off and did more research. A lot of mentorship happens when you're doing it wrong. Right? This is hard for some people. Right? Corrections, critique. It feels condemning, like you're not good enough. That's because it's true, you're not. That's kind of the whole point. Now, if you're feeling defensive, take a deep breath, ask yourself if you're being mentored. Without this person's input, I would have prepared an acceptable talk. You know, a perfectly mediocre, absolutely, utterly forgettable talk. That would have been fine. I spent just as much effort as I would have without the mentorship. I spent a lot less time flailing. And I ended up with a talk that was frankly quite good. Someone once told me that whenever they had a bad day at work, they would pull up the video of this talk and rewatch it. I was like, oh, that's super flattering. It's also a little bit creepy, but it is super, it is super flattering. They were actually applying to work at the place I worked at, and they came back for the second interview, and they were like, where's Katrina? Like, oh. Anyway, it was a lot of work. It was a lot of work for me, not so much for them, right? Technical conference speaking was this person's area of expertise, one of them. Every time I showed them something, it was completely obvious to them what I was doing wrong. It didn't cost them much to mitigate my flailing. They did it because it was easy and also worthwhile. Right? People rarely mentor for purely altruistic reasons. This person was not my coach. They weren't designing a training regimen to strengthen my speaking skills. Right? They weren't my tutor. They didn't walk me through step-by-step conference talk prep lessons. They weren't my nanny. They didn't babysit me while I did my homework. And they weren't my therapist to listen to me whinge about my insecurities about public speaking. They looked at my mistakes, and they helped me course correct. Since mentorship typically happens by accident, it follows that your best bet for getting mentorship is to become more lucky. I don't actually mean that you make your own luck, right? What people typically mean when they say that is that if you work really hard, you get opportunities, and that sometimes works, mostly if you're white. So most luck is out of your control, right? There's some science that suggests that you can influence it. In one of my favorite experiments of all time, a researcher named Richard Wiseman got participants who had self-identified as either consistently lucky or consistently unlucky. He gave each person a newspaper and asked them to count the photographs in it. On average, it took the unlucky participants 2 minutes to complete the task. It took the lucky participants mere seconds. On the second page of the newspaper, there was a half-page ad in ginormous type, and it read, "Stop counting. There are 43 photographs in this newspaper." The self-proclaimed lucky people tended to spot it. The self-proclaimed unlucky people tended to miss it. And so Wiseman did a bunch of different research into luck and the characteristics of lucky people and how unlucky people can become more lucky. And one of his observations was that lucky people deliberately introduce variety into their lives. They take a different path to work. They try something else off the menu. They watch movies they've never heard of. They talk to strangers. They don't ask them for mentorship. Unlucky people miss chance opportunities because they are too focused on looking for something else. Don't miss out on mentorship because it doesn't look like what you expect it to. Mentorship happens largely by accident between people who have existing relationships, and it tends to be informal, right? Neither party actually calls it mentorship. Sometimes a mentorship relationship develops over the long term, but just as often, it's a short-term, ad hoc thing. So to increase your odds, you need to build up trust with a large number of people. And you need to deliberately introduce variety into this pool of relationships. Get to know people with different interests, different backgrounds, different skills. Join a windsurfing club. Follow people who are nothing like you on Twitter. Go to meetups that are about something you don't really know anything about. Now rest assured that this is not about being a self-serving schmoozer sucking up to a bunch of people in order to get mentorship back out of it, right? Doesn't work. Networking, even if you don't schmooze, is not gonna help. Chit-chat over beers, over pizza, it doesn't build trust. The trick to building trust is generosity. Not spectacular generosity, but little acts of usefulness. Right? Generosity is not the same as reciprocity. Don't just help people you think have something to offer you. That defeats the purpose. That's behaving like an unlucky person. Listen more than you talk. Be genuinely interested in people's experiences. Understand what they care about. Understand what they need. And then help them achieve it. Pay it forward first, with no expectations of how or when it will come back around, right? And you probably won't find a fairy godmother. Right? There won't be one person who will be your one true advisor forever, full of wisdom about all of the things. And this is probably a good thing, right? You don't have a single point of failure. The mentorship that you get will be wonderful and strange and unrecognizable. Or not, right? Maybe you won't get any mentorship. There are no guarantees. And the secret is that's actually okay. Right? Mentorship is kind of overrated. And don't get me wrong, it's great when it happens. It is a life bonus. But if you know how to do the legwork and you know how to ask for help, you don't actually need it. When you're feeling discouraged, and overwhelmed, you don't need mentorship, you need encouragement. And that's what community is for. That's what CodeNewbie is for. Woo! Thank you.